Emma Wilson's trembling voice was the first clue that something was wrong. Just after midnight, the 12-year-old dialed 911, whispering that footsteps were echoing through her family's home. Within minutes, police arrived at what looked like a peaceful suburban house, but what they uncovered inside would spiral into one of the most chilling and unexpected cases the town had ever seen. It began with a call that no one in the police department would ever forget. The recording captured the fragile voice of a young girl, breathless, shaking, and almost too terrified to speak. On the line, she said, she was alone upstairs and could hear footsteps moving through the house. The words came out in short bursts, each one strained with fear, like she was trying not to be heard. Dispatchers asked her to stay calm, but the sound of panic and her breathing grew louder until, suddenly, there was silence. The line stayed open, but nothing more came from her. The operators listened to the faint hum of background noise, trying to pick out any clue of what might be happening inside the house. Officers were immediately sent to the address. It was a quiet suburban street, the kind of place where neighbors rarely locked their doors, and the most common emergency was a runaway dog. The house in question was a 2-story home with white siding and a trimmed yard. Nothing about it suggested danger. But to the officers arriving in the early morning darkness, the stillness felt wrong. There were no lights on inside, no movement by the windows, and no sign that anyone was waiting for help. They approached carefully, checking for forced entry. The front door, to their surprise, was unlocked. When they stepped inside, the air felt heavy and stale, as though the house had been holding its breath. Everything was neatly arranged, shoes lined up by the mat. A stack of unopened mail on the counter, and family photos on the walls. Nothing was broken, nothing overturned. It was the kind of ordinary order that made the girl's desperate call feel all the more unsettling. The officers moved upstairs, following the faint sound of something shuffling. In one of the bedrooms, they found the girl. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, trembling, her wide eyes locked on the doorway as though she expected something or someone to appear at any moment. She was alive, unharmed physically, but unable to explain what had just happened. When asked about the noises, she could only shake her head, whispering that she had heard someone moving around, but when she looked, there was no one there. The officers searched the rest of the home, moving room to room. The kitchen was spotless, the living room silent, the back door locked from the inside. They checked closets, cabinets, even under the beds, but found nothing unusual. It was as though the house itself had swallowed the mystery whole, leaving behind no answers. Yet something lingered in the atmosphere, an unease that none of the officers could shake. To the dispatchers listening back to the recording, one detail stood out. During the final seconds of the call, just before the girl fell silent, there had been another sound faintly caught on the line. A low creak, like a door opening slowly somewhere inside the house. That noise, paired with the girl's fear, suggested there was more to uncover. The first chapter of this case had begun, and nothing about it would prove ordinary. The officers moved slowly through the house, determined not to miss even the smallest detail. From the outside, the home looked no different than any other on the street, but inside it carried an energy that felt strangely unsettled. Every room they entered seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to be discovered. The girl remained upstairs under watch, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her eyes still darting toward the hallway as though expecting the footsteps to return. She couldn't explain what she had heard, and her words only deepened the sense of dread that grew with each passing minute. Downstairs, the search turned more meticulous. The kitchen drawers were opened, cabinets checked, and windows examined for any signs of tampering. Nothing appeared out of place. The officers began to question whether the noises might have been caused by an animal or perhaps the house settling in the quiet of the night. But there was one detail that kept pulling them back, the call itself. The way her voice broke as she spoke, the silence that followed, and that faint creaking sound. It felt like a clue that couldn't be ignored. Moving toward the basement, the officers noticed that the door leading down was slightly ajar. A thin draft slipped out through the crack, carrying with it an odor that was hard to place: musty, old and faintly metallic. Flashlights illuminated the narrow wooden steps as they descended into the darkness. The basement at first seemed typical: concrete floor, storage shelves lined with cardboard boxes, and the hum of a water heater in the corner. But one officer noticed something strange about the far wall. The pattern of the concrete didn't quite match the rest. A section of it seemed newer, smoother, as though it had been altered at some point. Pressing closer, they found what looked like an outline of a door. The seams were subtle, but once seen, impossible to overlook. When the officers pushed against it, the hidden entrance creaked open with unsettling ease, revealing a narrow hallway behind it. The space was so tight that only one officer could move through at a time, and the air grew colder with each step forward. The walls were unfinished, rough to the touch, and carried streaks of dark discoloration like water damage that had been ignored for years. At the end of the hallway was a small door no larger than a closet entry. Forcing it open, they stepped inside a hidden room. The space was cramped, with a low ceiling and no windows. The walls were covered with scratch marks, faint at first but growing deeper and more chaotic in places. On a small table sat a stack of photographs. They were not family portraits, but candid shots taken from outside the home through windows, across the yard, even from the street. The images captured moments of daily life: the parents leaving for work, the daughter playing in the yard, lights going out at night. Beside the photographs lay a warm leather journal. Its pages were filled with notes written in a careful, obsessive hand. Each entry detailed the family's routines, from the times they left the house to the exact meals they prepared for dinner. Every habit, every pattern, recorded with chilling accuracy. Whoever had been inside this room had been watching for far longer than anyone could imagine. The discovery changed the atmosphere instantly. What began as a search for a possible intruder had become something far darker. The house was no longer just a home. It was a place under surveillance, controlled by a hidden presence that seemed to know everything about those who lived there. And yet, the most unsettling question remained unanswered: where were the parents now? The officers stood frozen inside the hidden room, their flashlights cutting across the disturbing scene. The scratch marks etched into the wall suggested someone had spent time there, not willingly, but trapped. The air was thick, people with dust and the faint odor of decay, as though the room had not been opened in years, yet the photographs and the journal were recent. It was evidence of someone who had been inside the house without ever being seen. The realization struck hard. Whoever had been living there hadn't just been watching, they had been waiting. Every photo told a different story. Some were taken in daylight, others at night, but all carried the same uncomfortable truth. The images were close, personal, and invasive. One photograph showed the mother cooking at the kitchen stove, framed through the window above the sink. Another captured the father reading on the porch, his face completely unaware of the camera aimed at him from the shadows. The most disturbing of all were those of the daughter. Shots of her walking home from school, sitting on her bed with the curtains slightly open, even one where she appeared to be sleeping. Whoever had taken them had been inside the property, maybe even inside the house, while the family lived their lives with no idea they were being watched. The journal only deepened the horror. Each page was written with precision, detailing everything the family did hour by hour. It wasn't just broad descriptions, but exact notes. The father left for work at 7:12 a.m. sharp. The mother watered the garden every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. The daughter often left her homework on the desk by the window. There were references to phone conversations, private arguments, even meals that were never shared outside the home. Somehow, this unknown observer knew everything. As the officers read on, a disturbing pattern became clear. The notes in the earlier entries seemed harmless in comparison, almost like a diary of a curious outsider. But as time went on, the handwriting became erratic and the entries more personal. The author began to write as though they owned the family, referring to them as possessions rather than people. One line chilled investigators. They don't know they are already mine. There were also references to the basement, subtle mentions of doors and movements late at night. The entries suggested the writer wasn't simply watching, but orchestrating. The final pages were the most unsettling of all, describing to people, the man and the woman who had gone somewhere they could not return from. The words were vague, but the meaning was clear enough. The parents had been taken. Officers spread out again, combing through the basement with renewed urgency. The false door leading to the room had been clever, but now they wondered what else the house was hiding. Knocking along the walls, one officer noticed a hollow sound coming from behind a stack of boxes. When the boxes were cleared, another panel was revealed, this one harder to detect. Behind it was a second passage, narrower and darker than the first. The air that drifted from it was colder, damp, and carried with it a silence that felt unnatural. The realization sank in. The room they had just found was not the final destination, but only the beginning. The true secret of the house lay deeper, hidden where no one was meant to look, and whatever was waiting there held the answers to where the parents had gone. The second passage was unlike the first. It was narrow, damp, and cut deeper beneath the house than anyone expected. The walls were made of rough stone, jagged and uneven, as though they had been carved out by hand. The officers moved slowly, their footsteps echoing against the cold floor, their beams of light catching on long strands of cobwebs. The deeper they went, the more it felt as if the air itself grew heavier. Each breath carried the earthy taste of soil and mildew, and the silence was broken only by the distant drip of water from somewhere unseen. The passage twisted and turned, creating a maze that felt impossible to exist beneath a suburban home. It was far larger than the foundation above could have suggested. Along the way, they found disturbing signs that someone had been here often. Old food wrappers lay crumpled in corners. A rusted lantern sat on a ledge, its wick long burned out. Pieces of fabric clung to protruding rocks as though torn from clothing. These were not the markings of an abandoned tunnel, but of one used with purpose. After nearly 15 minutes of searching, they reached a heavy steel door embedded into the stone wall. It was tall, scratched, and fitted with bolts that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. Yet the floor before it bore fresh marks, trails in the dust where something had been dragged. The realization tightened their nerves. This was not just a hiding place. It was an entryway to something far worse. Breaking it open required force, the loud clang of metal against metal echoing through the passage. When the door finally gave way, a rush of air poured out, colder than the tunnel itself. Inside was a chamber larger than expected, dimly lit by a single bulb dangling from a wire. The sight froze the officers in place. The walls were covered in markings, symbols scrawled in charcoal, looping lines and jagged shapes that made no immediate sense. Some were smeared as though drawn in haste, while others were carved deep into the stone. Beneath the markings were chains bolted into the wall, their ends lying slack against the floor. A faint stain, dark and aged, spread out beneath them like a shadow that could never be scrubbed clean. The chamber contained more of the family photographs scattered across a wooden table. These were different from the ones upstairs. They didn't just show the family going about their daily lives, they showed fear. Images of the parents looking toward the camera, eyes wide as though realizing for the first time they were not alone. Some were blurred, taken in motion, as if they were trying to resist or escape. Each photograph captured a moment of helplessness, frozen forever. Security footage recovered later would confirm what the photographs implied. The parents had entered the basement the night before. They'd been lured down, likely by noises or by something left for them to find. The cameras showed them walking toward the door, unaware of what lay beyond. They never returned. The footage ended there, no intruder ever captured on film, no exit recorded. The evidence pointed to a single chilling conclusion. The hidden room was not the heart of the nightmare, only its surface. The chamber beyond the steel door had been the parents' prison, a place designed to keep them silent, out of sight, and utterly forgotten. And yet, even with this discovery, the most pressing question remained unanswered. The parents were still missing, and somewhere within the twisting network of tunnels, their fate was waiting to be uncovered. The steel door had revealed horrors no one expected, but the search was far from over. The chamber's grim markings, the chains, and the photographs suggested the parents had been there, but no bodies were found. Driven by urgency, the investigators pressed deeper, determined to uncover the truth hidden in the winding tunnels. The floor sloped downward, leading to another narrow corridor that stretched into darkness. Every step echoed like a warning, bouncing back from unseen corners. The silence grew unbearable, broken only by the officers' controlled breathing and the scrape of their boots against stone. At the end of the corridor, another door came into view. This one was different, modern, reinforced, and locked with a heavy padlock. Unlike the rough stone passage, this doorway looked deliberate, as though it had been built recently and with purpose. Forcing it open took time, but once the door gave way, the final secret of the house revealed itself. Inside was a hidden chamber, smaller than the last, but meticulously arranged. The walls were lined with shelves holding notebooks, maps of the house, and detailed diagrams of its secret construction. On a table in the center sat a box of cassette tapes, each labeled with dates stretching back months. The recordings, later reviewed, contained hours of whispered observations. The voice spoke about the family's habits, their weaknesses, and even their emotions. The tone shifted over time, becoming less like an observer and more like someone who believed they owned the people they were describing. One chilling tape ended with the words, "Soon they will stay with me forever." In a corner of the chamber lay another door, smaller and made of rusted iron. Breaking it open led the investigators into a final room. The smell hit first, sharp and suffocating, a mix of damp earth and something unmistakably foul. The light revealed the parents at last. Their bodies lay against the far wall, lifeless, positioned carefully as though arranged after death. Around them, symbols were drawn in thick black strokes, circling their remains. Evidence suggested they had been alive for several days after vanishing, held captive in the underground maze before their end came. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town, but the investigation took a darker turn when forensic results returned. Fingerprints found throughout the tunnels, on the steel door, and even on the journal upstairs matched a familiar source, the daughters. At first, disbelief rippled through the team. The girl had seemed like a frightened victim, the one who had begged for help, but the evidence was undeniable. She had been the builder of the hidden rooms, the keeper of the journal, and the voice behind the recordings. The 911 call that started everything was no cry for rescue. It was part of the plan. She had lured police into the house, knowing they would uncover the secret piece by piece, drawn deeper into the maze until they reached her final creation. The girl had orchestrated every step, from the false panic to the trail of discovery, ensuring her story would not remain buried. By the time the case reached its conclusion, the truth had shifted from horrifying to unthinkable. The daughter had not only destroyed her parents but also scripted the way the world would find out. The house, once just another suburban home, became a monument to her deception. What began as a desperate 911 call ended with a revelation so twisted it left even the most seasoned investigators shaken.